to the Fantasy Source Football Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with Bill Bender, and today we are talking about the AFC South, the mighty AFC South in recent years. This year, not so much. Not so much. I don't know. We're going to get to what your outlook is, but I see a downgrade of pretty much, for at least three of the teams in the division.
Well, it's that division starts with Indianapolis, and they seemingly always win that division, with Tennessee or Jacksonville maybe jumping up every once in a while. But there are big question marks with the Colts this year, and you did the preview for the Fantasy Source, so maybe you can tell us a little bit about Peyton Manning.
Well, here's the big thing about Peyton Manning, is that he had off-season neck surgery. It's the second neck surgery that he's had in the past couple years, I think 15-month period, so it's not even 2 years. He's older. Let's be honest, time is undefeated. Time is undefeated. Remember that, whatever sport you're talking about. Peyton Manning cannot be the same cyborg of Kurt Warnerian potential proportions that he's been over the past 10 years. It's just not going to keep going forever. I'm afraid that this year could be the last year that happens. Thing is, I'd never bet against that.
See, I can't bet against Manning.
No.
And from a simple standpoint, 11 4,000-yard seasons, that doesn't seem like a lot on its own. But when you consider Dan Marino is second with 6, it's just amazing what Peyton Manning's been able to do. And last year, even with him throwing for 4,900 yards, with all the injuries they had to Dallas Clark and other receivers, and he was throwing to Blair White, he was throwing to Jacob Tamme. The guy can produce, and they're going to be productive. But what they need to prolong his career, especially with the neck questions, is to develop a running game, and I'm not sure they have that.
Right. The crazy part about it is that every single receiver on the Colts, if he has a significant role, he's fantasy relevant. We saw that with Tamme last year specifically. Guy comes out of nowhere in his third year, I think it was. He'd been basically a nobody, an also-ran, and suddenly he's legit top 5 fantasy tight end, if not top 3, most week in, week out. The thing about, like you say, developing a running game, in real-life terms, that would involve revamping the entire offensive line, as well as figuring out who your running back is going to be. That's just not in the cards this year. I don't think that among the 3 runners that are on Fantasy Manager's radar this year, any of those guys are going to be – you're probably not in a good position if you're starting any of those guys.
Exactly. I went through in one of our experts leagues last year. I had Joseph Adai as my number 3, but it was a flex play, and I continued. I played him, then I played Donald Brown, I played Mike Hart, I played Javaris James, and none of it really had a lot of success to it. So it's a running back situation that I say, unless you're backed into a corner, you really got to stay away from.
Yeah, Donald Brown, is it DeLone Carter?
DeLone Carter.
DeLone Carter.
Rookie out of Syracuse. I stay away from these guys.
Yeah, stay away from them unless something major changes. That's the main advice. And then there's the team that is looking to unseat the Colts at the top of the division, and one that is a little bit controversial around the office, I would say, the Houston Texans. In all of our conversations, I have maintained all along that my skepticism of Manning's full health and getting older and such makes me think that Houston is a very good choice if you're going to choose them to win the division.
See, I can't do it, and I'm on the other half. The Houston Texans are the most talked about team in our office, and it's from a simple standpoint of whether or not they are soft. And Matt Latusky and I look at this team, and we've seen a soft team. They've been sexy and chic for the last 2 or 3 years, and they've never broken through. It's time. But that's doesn't matter to me from a just pure football standpoint. From a fantasy standpoint, they might have the best 1, 2, 3 in Matt Schaub, Andre Johnson, and Arian Foster.
Yeah, it's very similar to back in the mid-late 2000s with the Arizona Cardinals. They had guys. They had Kurt Warner, Larry Fitzgerald, and I believe for a brief period, Edgerrin James still holding on there at the end. Where you had, except that this Texans team, these guys are all still going strong or at the very beginning or primes of their careers.
Well, how often do you have the top running back in fantasy football and the top wide receiver in fantasy football on the same team? That makes the job easy for Matt Schaub, who I still think is a value quarterback pick that people aren't respecting on the level of Phillip Rivers and Peyton Manning and those guys. And I think you'll get him at a bargain price in the 4th or 5th round. And as for Arian Foster and Andre Johnson, they're both a little nicked up right now, but absolutely you shouldn't have any problem taking them in the 1st round.
Now, Foster, he went second in our first mock draft Fantasy Source mock draft. Do you see, with that injury concern, drafts in the near term and maybe closer to the season, do you think he'll be dinged in most drafts? Do you think you can get value by drafting him a little bit later? Or if you've got one of those top 3 picks, you have to take him?
I think he'll be one of the top 3 picks, and with good reason. You can't pass up on those yardage that he had last year. And it's even better if the Texans are behind because he gets the receiving yardage that he had last year. If I have the top pick, I'm still going Adrian Peterson first. But with Chris Johnson's holdout, who we'll talk about next, I think it's pretty even money between him and Arian Foster.
That's what's known in the biz as a segue. I mean, Chris Johnson holding out. I mean, I believe that he can hold out through week 10 or thereabouts and still come back and get a year's worth of service time, something along those lines. It doesn't really matter from a fantasy perspective, except that you might miss him for an extended period of regular season games, which would be catastrophic if you draft him in the first round.
Well, I was talking with Eric Faria this morning, and the writing's on the wall where can't you see that as we get into full swing draft season, about 5 or 6 days left until the season starts, and then he'll show up. And that just throws off every draft that's this weekend, every draft that's next weekend. Until he's actually in camp, I think he's going to fall a little bit further in the first round. And then you might be in that situation where you're at the back half of the first round, and do I take this guy or not? And in our experts mock draft, I took Chris Johnson with the 4th pick, and I felt pretty good about it.
Now, you took Johnson with the 4th pick. How high is too high for picking Javon Ringer, his backup, as a handcuff?
Well, I can't remember offhand what round I took him in, but I took him earlier than expected, and I was fine with it. Because if you are going to draft Chris Johnson, I think you absolutely have to get Javon Ringer, who isn't proven, but being a Big Ten guy, I saw enough of him at Michigan State.
Great return guy.
Yeah, great running back. Could carry the load with the Spartans. He averaged over 5 yards a carry in the first preseason game. He's a guy that isn't Chris Johnson. Not many people are, but he's certainly capable and a must-have insurance policy.
Among the other Tennessee players that are going to be fantasy relevant this year, Kenny Britt jumps out. Thoughts on him?
Well, any receiver that has the 225 yards in a week like he did last year is huge. I just think there are too many red flags. I'm not going to touch him personally because he gets injured. He has trouble with the law. They're breaking in a new quarterback and a new coach. He's just that's 1 week that I'll give it to somebody else.
So, I mean, really, if Tennessee's big guys on in fantasy purposes are Chris Johnson, who's going to be holding out potentially, Kenny Britt, who might get suspended at any moment, either by his team or by the league, is there anybody else that you would say might be fantasy relevant? I mean, at quarterback, you say Matt Hasselbeck has been a QB2 fill-in for the past couple of years after being a clear-cut first top 10 quarterback. What do you think about him this year, and then maybe even Jake Locker moving forward?
Well, they're going to split, and I would stay away from both of those guys. And it's just a situation where Hasselbeck's a little bit older. They may split time. They may split time in the same games, and you're getting into a mess. And I'm going to segue again. It's the same type of mess in Jacksonville with David Garrard and Blaine Gabbert, as in I don't know who the week 1 starter is right now, despite what Garrard has done in the past.
Well, at least Garrard and Gabbert have a relatively similar style of game where they're a little bit mobile. They can throw the ball, even though they don't have monster arms. They made their name on being at least a little bit more accurate than the next guy at the college level, or in Gabbert's case. In the case of Hasselbeck Locker, going back down, that's just totally different styles right there. But for Garrard, Gabbert, I feel like that Jacksonville and Tennessee are both in situations where the whole thing is they're just not set up to win right now. And it extends to even the good players like Maurice Jones-Drew, that I feel like there's kind of a stain on them because, you know what, it can work out where that guy produces a lot, but I wouldn't want to bet on it.
Well, Jones-Drew's a tough pick.
Yeah, the injury thing is the other.
Well, people are worried about the knee. The thing I like about Maurice Jones-Drew is he's into fantasy football. He lashed out at the critics last week, said he's going to be fine. Last year, he was the guy who fell because his knee was perceived to be hurt. This year, he's going to fall because the knee was actually hurt. But you're still looking at a guy that scored 63 touchdowns since 2006. You can't pass up on him late in the first round. I'm talking 11, 12, early second round. It's okay to go ahead and grab Jones-Drew. But again, just like Chris Johnson, you got got to get the insurance with Rashad Jennings, who's done more than enough in his limited action.
What do you think about, like I said earlier, time being undefeated, Reese Jones-Drew? Like you say, he's been playing since '06, and even though they split time with him early on, he's not the biggest guy in the world. He's taken a beating over the years. He's already shown the injuries. I mean, if you want to try to speak on behalf of him, what would you have to tell yourself in order to draft him that early? Because to me, I see them and I say I almost want to try to take a chance on anybody else I can think of at that point.
Well, it's the touchdowns again, and touchdowns win fantasy leagues. It starts with those, and he gets a bunch of them. And, it's just the stuff that around him, the uncertain quarterback situation, the lack of a wide receiver in Jacksonville, and being in a tough division. And if Jack Del Rio struggles, they may look to make a change. I mean, they're a team that people are talking about trying to relocate. So there's so much uncertainty with Jacksonville. I'd still maybe take a chance on him, but I'd probably wait to the second round.
Well, that's the AFC South. Houston's not soft. They had 7 sacks in that preseason game. Caveats about preseason aside, they're not soft.
We'll see.
All right, Bill. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.